I thought I'd take a minute today just to go over a few things between the KLR and the Triumph. So we're going to cover price, off-road, and then on-road mannerisms. One thing you have to consider when you're looking at price is although the MSRP base price of a KLR is probably about $10,000 less than this Triumph Tiger 800 the way it's equipped here, the Triumph Tiger 800 does come standard with cruise control, heated seat, heated grips, the aluminum crash guards around the fog lights, the crash bars around the engine guards, and an aluminum skid plate, as well as the off-road oriented pegs. So once you start adding all of those items to the KLR, the price difference between the two is really around $5,000 versus the $10,000 that it initially seems like. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're looking at these bikes. Let's talk for a moment about off-road characteristics. The first thing that you'll notice between these two bikes is that although on paper they weigh roughly the same, the way that they carry their weight is dramatically different, and that's because one is a single cylinder, one is a triple cylinder, one is based more around a dirt bike setup, one is based more around a street bike setup. What that means is that the curb weight in and of itself is not the key factor, it's how the bike carries its weight. And that affects things like picking the bike up off its side. Although we all try to keep them from falling on their sides, inevitably if you're doing enough off-road riding, it's probably going to happen. And if it does, picking the bike up, the Triumph is definitely, it feels much heavier, even though it's not that much difference in raw weight. And that's because a lot of the weight is carried up top with the valve train components and everything like that. Whereas with the KLR, essentially the weight is nice and down low. It's in the crankcase area and stuff like that. So picking the two up is a dramatic difference in off-road scenarios. The KLR, it does really well off-road. It's a full frame, so if you're crossing logs or something like that, I would not be concerned for a moment about, crossing a log and clipping the skid plate relatively hard on the KLR, because it is going to transfer all that impact through a much broader area versus the skid plate on the Triumph, which is attached to the engine, far more likely to cause engine damage if you were to clip that on something large like a log or a big rock or something along those lines. Other than that, they're both very, very capable. The KLR is gruntier, it has more torque, so essentially it's going to give you a nice low down pull. The Triumph is a very, very smooth power band, but it doesn't have that low end grunt. It needs to be a little bit higher in the revs. So if you're trying to get yourself up a hill from a dead stop, you're going to have to rev something like the Triumph a little bit higher. The KLR is going to kind of lug itself along. One thing to consider is that the Triumph in the off-road scenarios does come with the WP suspension, and that has been used by KTM in the off-road conditions for a long time, and it really, really does work well. You get fully adjustable compression and rebound, so you can really tailor this one to your liking. The KLR has very minimal adjustments, and the front forks are relatively soft, so you really do have to think about potential upgrades to the suspension on the KLR, which again is going to add to the price and bring the two even closer together. All in all, both bikes are very capable off-road. I feel comfortable on either one of them off-road, and it really just comes down to what type of rider you are, your riding style, and how confident you are handling the higher weight distribution on like a Triumph. Balancing that one takes a little bit more effort, where again, because the weight's down low on the KLR, it's a little bit easier to balance and manage in those conditions. So that is something to consider, but again, they're both very capable off-road. When it comes to on-road, longer distances, they're again both capable bikes. However, the KLR, again with it being a single, it's going to be a little bit buzzier on the highway, and it does max out at about 70 to maybe 80 miles an hour on the highway. Anything more than that, you're really going to start burning oil and stressing the engine on this bike. It's still capable of it, but again, it's not going to be as comfortable. It does not have any kind of cruise control, so you'd have to do something like a throttle lock if you wanted to do longer distances and keep your right hand resting at times. The other thing to keep in mind is that with throttle locks, they do tend to vibrate and back off, so it's not going to be the same as the electronic cruise control. Moving over to the Triumph, this is where this bike really shines. On the road, the seat is really, really comfortable. In fact, it's even more comfortable than the aftermarket seat that I have on the KLR, and that is a stock seat. It is a heated seat. It has heated grips, electronic cruise control. So all of these things really add up to just make it a more comfortable cruising experience. The other thing to keep in mind is that obviously because it is an 800 and a triple, cruising speeds of 75, 80 miles an hour are perfectly fine for this bike for hours on end. You don't get any of that buzziness. It's much smoother. It'll accelerate much faster. Passing is much easier. So those are also considerations. No matter which type of bike you decide on, you can have a lot of fun on either one for a reasonable amount of money. They both take abuse relatively well. And the one thing that you'll have to do is just, again, keep in mind that with the KLR, you're going to have to equip it more. You're going to have to add the crash bars. You're going to have to add the bags. You're going to have to add the open foot pegs. The Triumph does not come with fixed handguards. I'm still going to add those to that bike. The KLR did not come with them either. Almost everybody puts the plastic handguards on their bikes from the manufacturer. So you'll want to probably go and get something that's a little bit better protected. But again, the really key point here is that either of these two bikes are very capable in all scenarios. Either one of them you can go and have long trips, fun journeys, great experiences on. So I highly recommend, if you're torn between the two, just pick one. If you're budget constrained, go with something like the KLR. Have those experiences because you can always trade up later on. And again, I don't think you can go wrong with either of these bikes. Personally, I'm not a big fan of like the great big 1200s. I just don't have a need for them. If you're riding two-up or something like that, certainly they have their place in that scenario. But the 800 Triumph is more than capable at any speed on the highway, off-road, and really to me is more than enough bike for what I use or need. And I think most people would fall into that same category, again, unless you're riding two-up or you're a really big guy or something like that. Best advice to you is just, think about the type of riding you're going to do. Be honest with yourself, whether you're going to be doing more off-road riding, whether you're going to be doing more on-road riding, the area that you live in. Those are all good considerations to keep in mind when you're trying to make a selection. And then the last thing that I'll touch on just real briefly is you'll notice that both of these bikes have the Hide Now K60s on them. None of the bikes really come with good off-road tires from the manufacturer. So that's going to be an upgrade that you're going to want to do on either of these two bikes, is get you some decent 50/50 or some more off-road oriented tires, get off the pavement, get onto some gravel roads, and you're going to have an absolute blast. You can slide the bike around, you can turn the traction control off on the Tiger. They behave very, very well in all conditions. So I've had a lot of fun. I've got about 5,000 or 6,000 miles respectively on these bikes. I've had a chance to ride them both about the same amount of time, and I've enjoyed both of them thoroughly. So again, my recommendation would be to just, find one that you like, go used if you need to. If you're gonna go KLR route, shop around, you can get some good deals on the accessories that you're gonna want for that bike, and pack them up and go have fun.